The next session, Fighting Tax Avoidance More Effectively, will be moderated by Elodie Lamer from Tax Notes, with a slight change in the agenda. We will have Giulia Librandi from the EU Tax Observatory. Giulia, if you can come on stage, please. Kira Peter Hansen from the Greens. Thank you, Kira, for joining us today. Michael Schick from ETAF, please. And thank you very much for joining at the latest minute, Paul Tang, with us today.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. We're going to discuss how we can fight tax avoidance more effectively. We'll start by talking about what's already on the table, what's to come, and then what maybe is not to come, but what we should be thinking about. I won't introduce a second time the speakers as you just did. I'll just start with a really quick sum up of where we stand on Unshell, which is the proposal to tackle the misuse of shell entity. I don't know who was the trendsetter who made us all call it Unshell, but I like it better than ATA3. So if you don't call it ATA3, we'll be friends. So basically, we were expecting a ministerial debate on this proposal in the May ECOFIN, but then it was removed from the agenda. And then at the press conference after the meeting, the presidency said that, the finance minister, Elisabeth Svantesson, she said, I cannot make any promise on when we will get an agreement. There's still divergent positions on this. So now the ball is in the Spanish presidency court. And checking my notes, I don't know where I am. Yeah. So basically, based on compromise proposals that have been circulated to member states, we have issues among member states, notably on the substance itself, and it goes like issues like how far should the managing person be a resident? Is it can they be an hour away or just a distance that allow commuting every day? So that's one of the issue on substance. And then the other big thing, obviously, is the tax consequences. Some member states do not want to have any tax consequences. Some only want an exchange of information of saying this company is a shell or she's not a shell. We have very few public intervention on this. One of the only public intervention on this was in Tallinn last October. It's really warm in here. There was a tax conference in Tallinn, and there was Inga Clausen. She's an advisor to the Estonian Ministry of Finance, and she said first that Unshell's criteria don't reflect the modern way of doing business. Like it's too focused on a fixed place of business, substance. When actually now we have new forms of working with remote work, which has been exacerbated by the COVID crisis. And she also said that Estonia doesn't want tax consequences. Estonia only wants Unshell to be a tool for information sharing. So I'll start with you, Kira, as we discussed. How can we ensure that we can find companies that do not have substance, while at the same time taking into account digitalization and these new ways of working?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me and also for organizing this discussion. I think the conference is always one of the year's highlight, I think, so we're happy to be here. And I think it's a very difficult question that you raise, and I'm not sure if I have the full answer, because I think, of course, we need in some way to take into account that we work in different ways, and after COVID we saw completely new ways of working, and we might also see those ways evolving even more. So we need in some way to take it into account, but what my fear as well is that we also just create a lot of loopholes, and we know that these, if Estonia is successful in getting all of these criteria watered down, we risk as well that we can just have directors flying in for one meeting a year and then they are fine. So it's for me a way of finding a balance between adapting to the new labor market and a more flexible also labor market, and then avoiding that we just openly create loopholes. And I think it's quite worrying what the council is doing, and also that it's the only public statement we can find. I think that's also a bit sad.
Yeah, maybe I just wasn't looking hard enough, but I think I was.
Yeah, I think you were. Yeah, so maybe someone else said, but we will see. And I think what we worry is that this directive will be so watered down that it will just be like a new DAC 9 or something, and not even more than that.
Paul, I know that the Netherlands, unexpectedly maybe, is one of the countries pushing for this, and you also went in Luxembourg, and I think that MEPs discussed this with the government. So based on everything you know about your talks with government and officials, what are your fears, hopes, expectations? Can you say a few words about this?
Yeah, well, the fact that you remind the Netherlands is good. There are some positive elements too, but overall I think the picture is rather gloomy. It's of course a pity that Benjamin Angel is not here, because when it comes to Angel and SAFE, he would be the man to discuss this. But okay, I heard you had some questions this morning already. On Angel, I think one of the problems is that there's too little public exposure. So this morning I had an article in Euractiv together with two other shadows on the file, Gilles Boyer and Ernest Utterson from Renew and from the Greens, saying, well, we asked the Swedish presidency, put it on the agenda and then have it live streamed, please. That would be a good way. Let every country explain why they will not do it. Because the proposal by the European Parliament, proposition by the European Parliament was supported with more than 99%. Which is sort of, I can't remember a file having so much political public support as Angel, and it goes across all the party lines. But then again, the member states are not, in that sense, not political. A different coalition, and what my understanding is that Denmark and the Netherlands really pushing for this file. And that needs to be changed, and I think it's also in the interest of at least more than 2 member states to have this file continued. And indeed, that includes, for example, the tax consequences. It can't just be an exchange of information. It really needs to have teeth. So my hope is that I think it's the job from Parliament and other politicians to put it on the agenda publicly again, because I think public support and political support is generally pretty broad, and we need to make progress on this. I don't think it's doable. I don't think it's undoable, but it requires some screaming and shouting, I would say.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe there's also a sense that we've done enough now, because I remember Xavier Bettel was in the plenary recently, and he said, "Oh, we're not part of the problem anymore. We're part of the solution." And I remember discussing with you after this trip to Luxembourg, and like the sense I got was that Luxembourg considered it had done enough to counter tax avoidance. So also because we've adopted so many files, there's a sense that we
But that argument is consistently made. After ATAD 1, we have done enough. After ATAD 2, we have done enough. After it goes on and on and on. That's the usual argument. I usually find, been to Luxembourg and Switzerland, there's a complete state of denial. That is one of the problems that we face as European politics. Flat denial that there is a problem, and no willingness to look into it because there is no problem, right? Let alone to address it. So that's one of the issues we have to deal with. And this is why I like to have the discussion on taxation very much broader than it can't be Brussels-based. It needs to reach to all the capitals. And things may also change there. When I was in Luxembourg, I was grilled in a closed meeting session by Parliament, because before our visit was in the Luxembourg word, I believe I said Luxembourg is a tax haven. Which seems factual to me, but fine. But then half of the parliament grilled me, but then I also saw the other half of the parliament was sort of quiet or supported me. So it's maybe also changing in Luxembourg. But this is why you need to have this public ongoing discussion on what the consequences are of Luxembourg or Ireland or Switzerland being an investment hub. What consequences does it have for the rest of Europe?
Yeah, Moscovici said there's no tax haven in the EU, there are tax black holes. black holes.
Yeah, fine.
It was like a diplomatic
Yeah,
word.
maybe we can use that term too. I don't know.
Mikhail, I think that a part of the industry or tax practitioner, I've heard tax practitioners say that Unshell is like the failure of DAC 6, which introduced reporting on cross-border arrangement. So I was wondering, how does the industry prepare for this proposal, and what lessons can we draw from DAC 6?
For Unshell, you mean how the industry prepares?
I didn't say Unshell. Yes, I mean
for Unshell. Well, at the moment, we don't prepare yet. We closely monitor the developments. At this stage, we're still in the process. We try to make it feasible in practice. But in fact, tax advisors will have to prepare because, as you know, we're not directly in the scope. The scope of the directive is companies. They will have to report. They will have to see if they will have to pass these gateways if it comes like this. But then, of course, a typical entrepreneur wants to do his core business, and the tax issues, these tax things he wants to give to the tax office or to the tax advisor, so you do it. And so they will have to be prepared. Maybe just on a very general note, ETAF is representing regulated tax advisor with a strong professional law and with a compliance obligation, an obligation to fully comply with the existing tax laws. So on a general note, the goal and the objective of the Commission to fight letterbox companies needs support and has indeed merited support. So what we do, however, in our view, this whole two-tier system of gateway plus indicators of economic substance, this is too complex and is too complicated. In our view, one single package of indicators would have done it. And because as it stands now, the proposal, many companies would pass the first gateway. And then for nothing, and then with the reporting obligation or with the documents, could deep prove that they're not not letterbox companies. And then also additionally, we find a bit too extreme in the directive, in the proposal of the Commission, that I think if you're proven to be economically existent, to have economic substance, then you have to reprove it after 1 year all the time. So there has to be, if once it has been established that the economic substance is there, this presumption has to be held upright until there is further changes or substantive changes, in our view. That's the point of view. And DAC 6, yeah, that's a long story. It is different in the member states. We could talk about that too, but thanks.
Julia, you were in the FISC or the Econ Committee, I think it was the FISC committee back in October, and you warned MEPs about exemption for the financial sector in Unshell. Can you explain why, how, what we should do?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe more generally, I joined the point that Kira made on creating loopholes in the directives. I think that, for example, in the original proposal, there is the limit of 5 employees and also the exclusion for regulated financial undertakings. And I think when you insert these loopholes, you have to be very careful that they don't end up defeating the purpose of why you are introducing the directive in the first place. And so with the financial sector, the exclusion is, for example, for banks, investment funds, and insurance companies, and so on and so forth. So this, in the specific case of Luxembourg, to give a bit of context, we have to think that Luxembourg plays a central role in the current economy, especially for what concerns investment flows of multinational companies. Ruud kindly showed a graph earlier on showing how large the investment flowing through Luxembourg used as a conduit are. As a matter of fact, Luxembourg is like the 4th largest countries in terms of outward and inward foreign investment after China, the US, and the Netherlands. So this is very consistent and has a very large financial sector. So on top of this, we had in the past revelations like the LuxLeaks, where, for example, we see that companies enter into agreements with the tax authorities to create loopholes. And, for example, in these companies, you see that almost half of them are banks or investment funds. And these tax strategies involve also the creation of shell companies. So on top of this, we also had later on the LuxLeaks, so looking at the beneficial ownership registry of Luxembourg. And there, for example, we saw how investment funds, they can be opaque, and how there is actually little information on this structure. So I would just warn and think that maybe we should not miss the occasion to have additional transparency on this.
So the whole financial sector shouldn't be exempted, or specific?
Yeah, I don't see why we should have exceptions. Mm-hmm.
Another proposal that is on the table is about golden visa. It's in AML. I can't remember in which one, though. I don't know if it's in AML or I know it's not in AMLA, but I guess it's in the directive or in the regulation. Yes. Mm. You've introduced specific provision regarding golden visa in AML. And I know that the Commission has tried also to take this, to move forward on this through the long-term resident directive. They introduced specific provision in that directive, which has nothing to do with laundering or money laundering or tax. But on AML, what exactly is your expectation? What do you aim to get, and what can you get from the discussion? I think it's too early. You haven't been discussing this yet with the Council, but if you can say a few words about this.
Yes, so we've had the first trialogue, and as you might know, Paul is the rapporteur on the directive, and I'm a shadow on directive and regulation, and I think the aim is to ban all types of golden visas completely. This is, of course, not politically feasible. So I would say the aim is to go as far as we can in making restrictions both for resident schemes and citizen schemes. And of course, as you could imagine, there are some member states that are not very fond of the idea of closing these schemes. Maybe now with the Russian sanctions, or the sanctions on Russians, we might have a momentum to move forward, but it's also legally quite difficult. So I think the next steps is to assess also with the Commission and the Council what are the legal possibilities to make these restrictions. But
what are exactly the legal constraints?
Well, that a lot of like citizenships and residence is also national competence. So also when we see the court cases is based on this, like the breach of the sincere cooperation, and not anti-money laundering or citizenships or so on. So there are some legal difficulties.
When she told MEPs, I think it was in plenary, Ylva Johansson said, "Oh, we're going to do something on golden visa through the long-term resident directive." But then she said there's also a proper tax angle, because fake residencies can be used to circumvent the common reporting standard. And Julia, I think you've done research on this, or
no, but there is research on this using cross bank deposit, and they basically show how the introduction of these regimes actually allows the circumvention of the exchange of information, basically, as they can use the second nationality to register in another country, and register a bank account with a different nationalities, so to circumvent the exchange of information. So I join Kira's point again that this is problematic.
Okay, but this couldn't be fixed through amendments to the Directive on Administrative Cooperation. Can it? Like, I'm not sure how we can fix the problem. I don't know if you know, but
I guess some solution could be to flag these second passports, to kind of either treat them differently or really flag who has several nationalities.
Kira, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and just luckily now we see that a few member states are also moving forward themselves, trying to like limit or or like drop the golden visa schemes that they have, following especially the Russian sanctions evasions. But it's still a problem, and legally it just is difficult. So I think, and I don't know if any of you have expertise on how we can do this legally, because I think the legal arguments is probably going to be the main discussion in trialogue, I would expect.
But I think, Paul Tang, I think I remember you saying that the Netherlands actually made their golden visa scheme, golden visa or golden passport less attractive, and it dropped. Am I, like, my memory is failing me, or not?
I'm not even sure on that. I know that Malta withdrew it, limited its scheme, and Portugal did. So there is momentum for this. It's just a question on how to live up to this momentum, whether that's in the AML package or in another place. That's to be found out. But we use this file also to put pressure on the golden visas.
Okay. Benjamin Angel was not really clear on when we can expect the safe proposal, and I'm grateful for
He
Paola
usually is
to
very
check.
clear, so it's odd.
Nobody always gives some crumbs, you know, so we have something to write afterwards, but he didn't this morning. He just avoided the question, saying there's no conspiracy. I will turn to Mikhail for that. I know that tax advisors have specific concerns about this proposal, notably because the Commission says that they want to have something on intermediaries, but they also want to introduce a proper definition of tax avoidance. And you have specific concern about the definition of tax avoidance. I know that the Commission was looking at what the UK was doing, like saying that it was not intended by the legislator or something like that. Can you explain the concerns from the industry on this?
Yeah, thank you, Elodie. So first of all, just to be precise, it's not about tax avoidance. The term the Commission wants to define, planning. It's about aggressive tax planning, how they call it now. But even this is also not a new term, aggressive tax planning. But maybe we should put some light on the core of the discussion. What are we talking about? I'm thankful to Ruud. He mentioned it in his keynote. We are talking about international tax arrangements, often dealing with non-EU countries, which are considered as tax avoidance. I mean, the term is, as Ruud said, I want to take that up, is fully legal, but is perceived or considered to be somehow indecent behavior, because it leads to a tax loss in some member states. But still, we have to be clear, it is fully legal. It might be a clever exploitation of international tax jurisdictions, yes, but it stays fully legal. So, and then we come to the point where we normally should start with. So like better coordination of the international tax jurisdictions, and the Pillar 2, of course, with the tax rate is now a good step. But to be honest, it seems to me that the Commission realizes, or the European legislator, they realize we can do very little with the international tax jurisdictions, because these differences in the tax are sometimes wanted. Sometimes states, as everybody knows, they use tax law for economic purposes. So the means here are limited. And then we get the impression that these shortcomings on the international or global level are now to be passed on to the companies in case of Anshel, but it's a different angle, are now to be passed on the so-called intermediaries, or even worse, so-called enablers of aggressive tax planning. That's where the whole thing starts. But it's really a pity Benjamin is not here. Maybe for the public, there are 3-4 points what we heard would come in the directive, or what they... so there should be, but this is my information I have from Benjamin, or what Benjamin said in Zurich, or so recently, there should be a prohibition of so-called aggressive tax planning with a definition. The definition shall have different components. And then there shall be a register where and one additional thing, the whole scope of the directive, that goes a little bit into the right direction. The whole scope of the directive shall be that the tax arrangement always has to do with a non-EU country. So at the moment, what the Commission is working on, only intra-EU or only national tax arrangements are out of the scope. And then there shall be a register for enablers, and then there shall be sanctions, and so further on.
Yeah.
So main thing from us, like as I said in the beginning, regulated tax advisors, they are not enablers of aggressive tax planning. So really, tax planning is the core business of every tax advisor and is also an economic necessity for a typical entrepreneur. And to avoid taxes in a legal way is also very legitimate. I don't know one entrepreneur who voluntarily pays more taxes than he needs to. Yeah? I mean, there might be a change in mentality to show to the outside we pay our fair share of taxes, but not more than needed. So that's the core problem.
Yeah, my accountant just did my taxes, and he said that we have a right to the least taxed.
Yes, in
least
Belgium,
tax route.
least tax route.
So in some member states, it can even clash with this.
Yes,
right.
could be.
But it could be circumvented. No, I don't know.
It is, but the tax laws at many occasions offer choices, offer possibility, and then it's your choice to choose it. And if it, in the end, effect, it leads to less taxes, then it's your free choice. That's what the Belgian, I think it's jurisprudence, that meant with the citizens has the right to choose the least taxed route. Yeah.
And just to be precise, what Benjamin Angel said in Zurich, in the American Bar Association conference, he said so there would be a register, and like good intermediaries would be in the register. You can be delisted if you don't respect the rules, and if a European taxpayer use one that is not on the list, on the register, then the taxpayer can get a fine. So that's what he announced. Maybe to the MEPs, I know that it might be a tax issue, and then you might not be co-legislator, but we could, if Benjamin was here, I would ask him what the legal basis would be, but maybe there's a chance it could be like a company law directive, and you would end up co-legislator. And I know that the industry is concerned about that because you might be more ambitious.
I'm concerned about
and if you're co-legislator, then it has an impact. So I'm wondering to the both of you what you would want to see in this proposal to make sure that it's robust.
Well, the elements that Michael listed are important, of course. And it starts with a register and disciplinary measures. Because with the system you have now, is like 8 countries have, in the tax advisor is a protected profession,
yes,
about 8 European countries.
Yeah, more or less.
That means in the other European countries not. So you have the so-called liberal countries, which is the same as unregulated. These are the countries like the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Ireland. Right. So it's, for me, it's pretty obvious that you need some sort of register and a disciplinary mechanism to make sure that tax advisors do not are given every leeway to find the loopholes in the system. There will always be loopholes. And besides, I'd like to think that it is also in the interest of the tax profession, right? One of the positive elements of the discussion in Luxembourg that I met with with the Big Four, and they all acknowledged that it was also in their interest to have a regulated profession, because even if they are not engaged in aggressive tax planning, some unregulated tax advisors may, and that will hurt their reputation as well. So they were generally in favor of having more regulation. Just to make clear what is at stake. So I'm very much looking forward for the proposal for the Commission. Of course, the problem is, what is the definition of aggressive tax planning? How to make that sort of legally bulletproof? Well, that's a difficult job, but I don't think it's undoable again. But this is what the hard homework for the Commission is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also as well the definition is going to be key, and probably here the Parliament is not going to be like directly involved with the legislation, but I still think in the tax committee we will discuss it, and also in the civil society hopefully, so we can also through a non-legislative proposal affect what the outcome will be, and then I think this definition is also key to ensure that we can can restrict what we then see as aggressive tax planning, and hopefully also limit it. I think you're very honest in what you're saying, but I think from my perspective, there's also a little political goal of decreasing the ideas that you're mentioning. And I think that's going to be a very interesting discussion also between different stakeholders, like what are the balances that are needed. And then hopefully the parliament is going to be involved in some parts of it, and then can always use the opportunity to raise the issue of unanimity again.
Julia, does the EU Tax Observatory have an opinion of how the proposal should look like? Also, maybe the definition of aggressive tax planning.
I think.
Oh, you from your personal experience, obviously.
That's quite challenging. I think there are different elements that we have to consider when we look at this proposal for the SAFE directive, so that you have the tax haven where the laws are available to, or tax black holes, where you can move your money around or incorporate companies, and then you have some opacity where tax authorities don't have full information, for example, on the wealth of the very high net worth, on the full activities of multinational companies. Now a bit better with country-by-country reporting, but still there is some information that is missing or that is not completely consolidated in a single place. And then in this setting you have what we call enablers that help so people to navigate through these rules and create their tax schemes. So I think this initiative is very important also to make this profession very responsible and aware of the role that they play in the economy and in the society. And one of the things I would worry about is the international aspect of the profession, enablers in general, and also of the, for example, the very high net worth individuals that you will find yourself with people that have different passports, they go in different countries, they have properties or financial assets in different countries. We saw this with all the leaks that were out there, and we have a lot of what we call enablers that are not in Europe. So if we want to target, I think this is going to be very challenging if we try to target Europe or European enablers. I would really try to think what we can do to have a more global outreach. And maybe one aspect that is missing is also increasing the power of some measures that are already there, like the automatic exchange of information or a consolidation of information that is already there.
You wanted to add something?
Maybe I can add something, yeah. It's just a point and maybe a call on my two neighbors here, if they might be then the co-legislators. According to the definition, you said definition will be key, and you too. And that's what we think too. A clear definition will be key. Again, it's a pity Benjamin is not here anymore, because that's what he promised, to deliver a clear definition. I say this because in previous times, last year, during the consultation process and so, and in the development of all this, we were seeing and reading of things like a tax arrangement which is not in line with the spirit of the law, or which has not been intended by the legislator. These are all vague terms, and a tax advisor cannot work with this. Otherwise, you're with one foot in the legality, and with the other foot, you're in jail or suspected to be a tax evader. And as you all know, in these days, tax evasion, real tax evasion, is persecuted in a very, very harsh way, and that's justified. So, this point I would add.
Okay. So that's one of the proposals that we're actually expecting, and I want to turn to what we're not expecting but should be on the agenda or on the pipeline. like maybe that's a question for you, Miguel. What are the new loopholes this season? You know, like
The new proposals?
what are the fashionable loopholes this season? You know, like we closed some loopholes. There must be new ones. I mean, I'm kidding. But then, if like, what is the?
The new loop.
Sorry.
I will not answer that.
It's a joke.
Yeah, I know.
So I just would like to put the same question to all the speakers. What should we look at? What are the concerns or the challenges or the, I don't know, something that it's not on the agenda and should be higher on the agenda? You want me to start with Kira?
No.
You don't know.
No, I think there's a lot on the agenda, right? So with Unshell, with SAFE, with holding framework. Let me two things. I think the AML is important also because it allows better identification of beneficial ownership. That's at least what we push for in a directive. A clearer definition and a broader set of assets. So for real estate, it should be good accessible. You want to extend it. The Parliament wants to extend it to high-value cars, planes, and boats, for example. But we also looked at free zones. So what I find very interesting is that we get a lot of data, but we don't always share this data with tax administration. For example, we visited the free zone in Luxembourg. It's registered first by the Luxembourg Customs Union, and then it's registered by the beneficial, the obliged entities. But all the information, what is in the free zone, and I'm really curious what's in there, is not shared with the tax administration, Luxembourg or other European, which is odd. So we have an entire system of for AML, which we don't share the information. So this is something which I think over time and will over time, all the information will feed into the tax administration and will be a big help in fighting tax avoidance. So that's the one thing that I really want to see over time to occur when it comes to tax avoidance. But Ruud also pointed out the one reason why I'm also keen at Pillar 1, because it's the first time we introduced formula apportionment there. And I think that's one of the key. I've been advocating the CCTB in the previous...
You were rapporteur.
I was rapporteur, yes, together with my good friend Alain Lamassoure. We were advocating that in the previous mandate, and now this discussion has to come back, because I think that principle will be fair, but also very efficient in a not maybe excluding every loophole, but yes, much more robust than this current system with arm's length pricing.
Well, in fact, what Paul says, we're a bit in an era of a lot of reporting obligations. So I would say what we can do, but this is already in progress. First, evaluate better the existing regulations, and therefore we are looking forward to the Commission evaluation of DAC 6, which should come in autumn or maybe next year, I don't know. And there has been a study of the European Parliament also, critically looking at the effects of DAC 6, which is, by the way, implementation very, very different in the member states, and some member states have very, very low reports to be done. And then secondly, well, look again at the international community. There is more coordination work to be done there, or also within the EU, if possible. For example, better coordinate the tax laws in general, if possible, but then also could be a possibility to make tax audits earlier, more in time, or to make common tax audits between the member states, for example. These would be measures, so better international cooperation. And it's true, tax administration is often flooded with information. They don't know what to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with this, and I think besides this, what I can add is the EU list of tax havens. It's an ongoing discussion, but still here we see lacking criteria and a poor framework. So I think this is something where we still have loopholes. And then a thing to consider or look into, and I think this is also something in the tax committee we can look into, is we discussed it a bit, but the new way of work. Because when we have even more cross-border workers and teleworking, that poses an impact on the taxation system for residents, and that's not necessarily EU harmonization, but I think it's a discussion we need to have to avoid future loopholes. And then on a more broader, like, democratic perspective, ensuring that we have discussions on tax and so on in a public space and not just behind closed door in council. And here the unanimity comes in, but also transparency, and where I think the tax committee, this is something we try and do and bring the discussions out there. So I think that would be the main points I would focus on.
Julia?
Yeah. So a bit linked to what I was saying before, I think one of that there was a lot of progress in the last year, especially with the automatic exchange of information. Maybe something that is lacking there is a bit to make this more comprehensive and condensed in a single place, and covering more and more assets, because also research shows that people that want to avoid this regulation or the exchange of information, they change the assets in which they invest, particularly after the introduction of the exchange of information. So what would be important is to have something more comprehensive, so that includes more assets. So DAC 8 with crypto is a good development in this, but we should, for example, think of real estate and making what is already there a bit more detailed and fragmented, and potentially gathering all this information in one place, so that governments can have information on the global assets that are owned by different people. And also making the exchange of information wider and include more countries. One of the drawbacks there is the way in which the US is participating to these exchanges, where you have a more limited set of information that is exchanged, and there I think it would be very important to have some developments.
I'm a bit confused at the timer, because I have that it's... Sorry? I can move to Q&A, okay. Well then I'm moving to Q&A. Is there any question? Can you raise your hand and introduce yourself and maybe tell who the question is for? No question? Oh, there's a question soon over there.
Yeah, hello, Business Europe Tax Policy Group again. As I heard you didn't really speak about simplicity or simpler rules. The tax advisors, not surprisingly, mentioned very fragmented national implementation, and my impression is the rules might actually be much easier to control and administer by national tax authorities if they were simpler. And it just seems everything coming from the EU, unfortunately, are more and more complex. To be honest, I sense that people are becoming more and more kind of skeptical about if this will really work, because it's just becoming more and more complicated. So I'm not sure exactly who to ask, but perhaps Paul, if you should kind of help me propose how the EU could come up with simpler rules, what would your advice be?
Shall I have a go at it? Okay. I'm a bit suspicious about the idea that we need more simplicity in a more complex world, in all honesty. I don't think that's I think we are going towards much more data-driven world. We have much more data, and it's about how we organize the data. So a lot of data available. It's just the tax administrations also be able to process the data and come up. So I don't think it's simplicity itself that is what we need. What we need is sometimes a more robust system. And so I didn't mention simplicity, but in my mind, formula apportionment. Once in the CCTB, now to be had in the BFIT, could make the system much more robust and much more simple. That's how I would like to see it, and sometimes that's simplicity. So I see a reform where we can make it in that more robust, in that sense more predictable, not necessarily more simple. but more predictable, more robust. That's what we're looking for, and there are the ways to do that. May I add, because Kira also mentioned the point of the black and the grey list of EU tax havens. I think we sometimes complicate our life in the EU by allowing to do business to do deals with obscure jurisdictions, right? So we could simplify that tremendously. So it's places where the beneficial ownerships are unknown, but they are not on the blacklist. Well, maybe we should rethink our policy there too. That would simplify the job enormously. So I can think of some simplifications if you urge me.
Is there any other speaker who wants to add something on this? Yeah.
No, I think, and then of course there's also the issue sometimes of national implementations that I could imagine is also creating some of the complexity. And I think in the ideal world we would just have like harmonized rules and implementation, but then we have the issue of political will to do that, which I guess no member state is interested in. And hopefully, Paul mentioned some of the ideas with the digitalization. Hopefully it will also solve some of it.
Maybe I can also add
Yeah, go ahead.
just one point. It is true that the tax jurisdictions, even within Europe, they're hugely different when it comes to simplicity or complexity. You have some admittedly smaller countries, like rather northern countries, Baltic countries, where tax declaration is super easy, or the tax administration does it for you, and you only respond if there's something wrong, and you check it. But then you have other big countries, like France, Germany, where you want to display every case, and that's why it gets complicated. But it's true that the EU is not supporting more simpler tax system. But just maybe to tackle one, because sometimes there's a rumor like tax advisors, they are not really in favor of simplifying tax laws because they live from it, and I can tell you it's not the case. There is enough work for tax advisor. This profession has often been rumored to not exist anymore due to digitalization or artificial intelligence, and it's not the case. The contrary is the case. The profession is growing at the moment. So we would be in favor of more simpler tax system.
Julia, you also want to know? Okay. Any other question? Yeah? I think there's a mic somewhere.
Yeah, that's the
This
mic.
is the microphone.
That mic, okay.
That's a cool one, a weird one.
It's like
Pretty cool. Did you bring it from home or what?
It's a cubic one. So basically, I come from the software world, and indeed, we are trying to help some of our clients structure the data that they're supposed to feed to different tax administration, and between the CBCR, for which they already struggle, the Pillar 2 that is incoming, that will have the same data but a little different, with ATAD 3, which also requires some kind of sales measurements and so on. So the question is, we're requesting from companies that already struggle to produce data that they don't fully understand, and that in itself create task risks for them that is actually maybe not substantiated by decisions on their part. So maybe one way to ensure that the policy that is constructed incorporates this problem is that the data structure is also present in the document. So basically, what are the definitions of every data point in the different potential norms, and also what are the supposed computation and actual equations that are supposed to be used in order to meet any thresholds. And if there are corresponding elements in national already existing tax systems, like in France, most of the data for ATAD 3 is present in some of the tax declarations. Well, how do we automatically transpose that into the qualification for ATAD 3? This would enable tremendous improvement of computations for the groups, and it would make compliance a lot easier. And instead of having an inflation of the norms, it would just streamline the process of feeding the administration with data that they can actually use. Because right now, if we look at the CBCR, it's mostly unusable because the quality is really low. I don't know if that makes sense. So my question is how do we incorporate the needs in terms of data structure and quality into actual legislation?
Who wants to answer that? I know that you called it repeatedly ATAD 3. It's when I specifically said it's not an ATAD 3. Anybody wants to answer this question?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I fully oversee what you're suggesting. To be honest, but in general, my experience with legislation, that this is always part of a discussion how to make sure that that the legislation is, let's say, as easy to use as possible. So that usability is one of the issues, and of course you learn over time. Usually, this is of course done by not by the parliament, by the council, but what I take from the discussions in the council, the discussions are very similar. With Anshel, we had seen there was a proposal to minimize on the data for tax administration coming from the Dutch side, where you see this. So this is usually an ongoing discussion how to make sure that what we do is proportional and effective. But that's a more general remark. And if there are good ideas out there, well, please bring them forward. I'm happy to have them to bring them into the discussion.
Maybe.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I think it is true that sometimes there are some definitions that are not very clear. Like, for example, I know country by country reporting very well, and I think saying it's unusable is a bit of a stretch, because there are certainly some clarifications that need to be done. This is also something that started a few years ago, so I think these initiatives should be encouraged, and then they should be reviewed and improved, certainly, but yeah, I wouldn't go as far as you go with.
The box travel there, Gabriel?
I'd like to please Gerasimos Thomas, and I'm going to ask a controversial question for the panel. And the question is this. So we started the discussion by saying tax avoidance is always legal. That was the starting point. My question is it really the case? Is it really the case that tax avoidance is always legal? And what I mean is this. In the tax law of most countries, there are provisions, which are known as economic substance provisions, that say that any transaction that's conducted with the sole purpose or the main purpose of avoiding taxation is illegal. That's true since ATAD, but it actually predates ATAD in most countries. Now, when you are Google, and in 2003 you create a shell company in Bermuda, and then for the next 16 years you book hundreds of billions in revenue in this shell company in Bermuda and dozens of billions of dollars of profits in this shell company in Bermuda, in a country where obviously there is no economic substance, there's no production taking place in Bermuda. When you ask them about this, they say, it's tax avoidance, it's legal. And I say, look, there's no substance, that's not legal. And I think there is a really strong argument that this is illegal, but what has happened is that there has been a choice that's been made to not go after those forms of tax evasion for various reasons that we can discuss, the difference in resources between tax authorities and companies, for instance, or lobbying or other things. And so my question is, shouldn't the priority be to go after those illegal forms of tax avoidance and to better enforce the spirit of the law? Yeah, thank you.
Interesting.
Who wants to answer?
Who wants to?
You want to start this time?
It is true that there are in many member states, or even internationally, in many member states there are these anti-abuse rules, and they talk about if there is the only purpose of a tax arrangement is to avoid taxes, then it gets illegal. But maybe it was only a misunderstanding so far that the term avoiding taxes is here or also here in this the title of the panel, or maybe in the discussion, kind of institutionalized, and this is what I was against it. You should not institutionalize the term tax avoidance or tax avoiding, because many completely legal, where there is substance, legal arrangement, they also avoid taxes. And once again, everybody wants to avoid taxes. I say this very clear, and I think it's legal to do that. So
you need to use the mic. Where is the mic? But otherwise it won't work.
I'm just curious to understand. So very concretely, for instance, in the case of Google, would you say it's legal, like they do? They kept saying that for many years, or would you say, nah, in fact, it was pure tax evasion, but we, chose to tolerate it?
Paul, you wanted to say
No,
something?
maybe there was a question to you.
In the case of Google, it's not. But then they're using other international tax laws also. Then it gets illegal. But many, I was just against the institutionalization of the term tax avoidance. And that's also why the European Commission, as far as I heard, in the new SAFE proposals, the term tax avoidance as such does not appear. They now call it aggressive tax planning, which might be a bit on another level, which is still in a gray zone, which is still trying to put something out of the gray zone into illegality. But let's see the proposal, Paul.
Now, just two remarks. Google, I think it's based in Dublin. So who is going to sue that? The Irish government.
Yeah.
So it seems a bit sort of. Well, we know what the business model of Ireland is, right? So it's just making sure the tax administration is lenient, is pro-business, so to say. The same is true for the data protection commissioner over there, lenient to the big tech companies that are located in Dublin. So who's going to sue? That's the problem. But you're right, you can sue. But I was reminded of the cases that were put forward by Vestager and that ended up at the European Court, and they were annulled. Right, so it's not an easy. So even they did go after. Personally, I thought they would win against Ireland/Apple, but they did not. So it's not that. So I think currently it's legally a gray zone, and you're absolutely right that we need those court cases to make sure that it's no longer a gray zone, and that the tax advisors or their clients can hide behind this gray zone. It's too big right now. So the SAFE proposal may help to minimize this gray zone, but also court cases can absolutely help to by developing jurisprudence, minimizing the gray zone. It would definitely be a help.
We've exhausted the time we had for this, so thank you to the panelists. Thank you for the EU Tax Observatory for organizing this, and I think we have another coffee break. No, we don't, sorry.
Okay. Thank you.